I sometimes give a contemporary sort of made-up example, and I've got several of these that I'll use. Suppose that one morning you're at work, one of your co-workers comes in late, and he says, "I'm sorry, I'm late today. There was an accident at this particular intersection," and he names the intersection. And so I had to go around. And then later on, like many hours later, another worker comes in, and he comes in quite a bit later. And he says, "I'm sorry I'm late." He said, "I drove through this intersection," and he names the same intersection, "and I got a flat tire because there was glass in the intersection." So the first person does not mention anything about there being glass, although he mentions an accident which could have caused glass on the road. The second person does not mention anything about an accident, but he got a flat tire, he says, because there was glass in the intersection. So that's an example, kind of a simple example of an undesigned coincidence. These two people do not appear to be trying to corroborate one another, but they name things that causally do fit together. That the accident could cause glass and that could cause the flat tire. So that's an example of how they're coming together. The coincidence is important, but it also appears to be undesigned.
There are a lot of issues with this hypothetical account that ignores important logical steps. So, the one guy is late to his job because of an accident at the intersection. Hours later, another worker comes in late because he got a flat tire from the glass at that same intersection. Her point is that these two instances corroborate that there was an accident at that location. Or rather, there most likely was an accident at that location that morning. But you see, the problem is that that's not what it actually does. At best, you could say that that particular intersection is just prone to accidents. I mean, glass is a pretty common thing on the road, and getting a flat tire in any way is really a common occurrence. I mean, the accident could have happened or it could have never happened. I mean, if that particular intersection is prone to having accidents, then both of these guys could be lying. Or they could be telling the truth. One could be lying while the other is not. The stories of either of these guys really has no effect on the likelihood of there being an accident at that intersection. An accident is only one of many equally plausible explanations given the information that we have. What you would need to do is independently verify through traffic accidents or news reports that an accident actually occurred at that location. This is basically an argument from possible means probable. Their argument boils down to, well, it's possible there was an accident, therefore it's probable that there was an accident. This isn't valid, because just because something is possible doesn't mean that it's necessarily probable, let alone the most likely answer. The insinuation in this context is that this is similar to how the Gospels were written. In order to accurately represent the Gospels and how they were written, you would have to have the first guy hallucinating an accident that happened at an intersection that he's never been to. Then you would have a second guy come in and hear this one guy's hallucination. Well, the second guy is late, so he uses this explanation of an accident that happened as his reason for being late. And then you get a whole group of guys that come in, and they're all late. And so they use one another in order to build a narrative that there was an accident at this one particular location that this one guy hallucinated. They all copy and redact and change little tidbits of things so that it makes it seem like they're all telling the same story, just a little different. Now she's going to talk about what a designed coincidence would be.
If these accounts were designed, what would that look like, and why would that not count toward reliability?
Right. So suppose that let me just point out, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're telling a falsehood, but suppose that one person overheard the other person mention the accident, and his overhearing it isn't necessarily the problem, but suppose he said, "Yes, and by the way, I can confirm that because I noticed glass in the intersection." All right. Now, that's still interesting and everything, but he's attempting to confirm what the other person said. He's explicitly attempting. And so that would appear different. That would not appear casual in this way where it's like they don't appear to be trying to confirm one another. They just do confirm one another.
Yeah, so that wouldn't lend any more credence to the other guy's testimony.
But that is exactly what is happening with the Gospels. I think that's why she added that designed coincidences don't necessarily mean that something is false. I would agree, but it also means that these designed or undesigned coincidences can't exactly be used to support a claim as true. Now, these coincidences in the Gospels are definitely designed because the Gospel authors were reading the other Gospels that were existing at the time and then changing, redacting, and adding to them in order to craft their own narratives. This has actually been known to scholars and historians for a long time. That's why this apologetic just doesn't make sense. Cameron initially didn't accept this apologetic, but his self-indoctrination game is pretty strong.
The reason why we're doing some of this work up front is because it's really important to understand the concept itself. As I was trying to study and learn more about undesigned coincidences, because when I first started out, I wasn't super convinced that this was good evidence. And so as I started to study and look more into it and really understand what the concept meant, how it all sort of tied together, and how it's not just one case, it's multiple cases, and so they sort of stack together.
Now, normally, a cumulative case is much stronger than just a single instance type of case, like with parallels. If you find one particular detail of a story in another story, it doesn't necessarily mean that the former parallels or copies the latter. But if you have a lot of these details that match one story to another story and even occur in the exact same sequence as the other story, then you have a much stronger case for one story paralleling another. It's like West Side Story and Romeo and Juliet, or Lion King and Hamlet, or like Jesus and Osiris, Inanna, Zalmoxis, Dionysus, Romulus, Theseus, Hercules, Adonis, and Tammuz. My point is that cumulative cases can be powerful, but this is not one of those times. If the gospel authors read and copied from one another, then we should expect to see similarities, some differences, and some designed coincidences. So Cameron initially had a healthy amount of skepticism towards this argument, but it just goes to show you how easily you can be convinced by a bad position.
This is actually a really good time to talk about circumstantial evidence and how multiple lines of evidence that may not seem super strong on their own, once you combine enough evidence, basically you can build a really strong case out of just circumstantial evidence.
Unless it disagrees with his position, then it's not a valid argument. But if it can be used to prove his particular version of God, then it's totally solid. Gotta love that confirmation bias, huh, Cameron?